Alrighty, so Mr. James Mangold has been making the rounds lately about, well, different comments that he's been saying, and I feel like some of these he's just been saying without giving it too much thought, and that's totally fine. I mean, it's his right to do that, just say whatever comes to his mind in regards to the projects that he has coming up. Totally fine. I mean, it's, just whatever he wants to talk about. But I feel like, and it's interesting because he did Logan, so he's pretty familiar with the comic book movie genre, but I wonder if he realizes how a YouTube channel, a very small, insignificant YouTube channel such as my own, will then take his comments and dissect them. And now, I want to be fair to him, right? I think one of the things I try my hardest to do on this channel, is not just dissect it for the sake of dissecting it, but really try to get to the spirit of what they're trying to say here. Be honest to them, not just chase clickbait and things like that. I hate clickbait. It's the worst thing. And I know there's a fine line between trying to optimize for algorithms and searches and stuff like that, but I mean, just like blatant lies and clickbait, I hate it. So, I try to really represent his comments and other people's comments as truthfully and honestly as I can and glean whatever we can out of it. So, but James Mangold, he's not helping himself because he's saying a lot of things that honestly, I think, people can easily take the wrong way and misconstrue and get angry about. So he talked about Star Wars. We talked about that in the last week's episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod, which, yeah, I mean, it angered some people because people thought he was saying, hey, I don't care about Star Wars lore. And even when people, I think, understood what he was saying about that, I think people were still concerned about it. And that's totally, you're right to be concerned about it if you feel that way. I personally am not, because if what I'm taking him to say, which is, I think, exactly what the intention was, is just to say, I don't want to make a Skywalker movie. I don't want to make a, Mandalorian movie. I want to do my own thing in Star Wars and don't want to be handcuffed by all the Rey Palpatine clones and stuff like that. That's totally fair. I mean, there are very few people in this, in this world who are both genius filmmakers and also in tune with the stuff about everything about the Palpatine clones and the Battle of Jakku and everything that happened after Episode 6 with Project Cinder, and like nobody, there are very few people in this world who are as gifted of filmmakers as James Mangold, who also just care about that kind of stuff, and that's totally fine. He can be a Star Wars fan and not have to, be entangled in that lore. And now he's taking his comments and bringing them to DC, and he has something to say about Swamp Thing, which honestly, Swamp Thing, I kind of thought, is this dead? Is this ever going to happen? Because a lot of the projects that James Gunn talked about at the jump in, I think, early 2023 are just not being talked about at all. So, James Mangold, I keep wanting to say James Gunn instead of James Mangold. James Mangold had this to say about Swamp Thing. It's a pretty short quote here, but I think James Mangold is not doing himself any favors because this quote could easily be misconstrued. And I don't think he's intending it to be, honestly, although I can understand where the different viewpoints come from. So he had this to say about his Swamp Thing movie. He's going to be the director of it. Quote, while I'm sure DC views Swamp Thing as a franchise, I would be viewing it as a very simple, clean, gothic horror movie about this man/monster. Just doing my own thing with this, just to stand alone. Okay, so here are the headlines, right? And here is one, actually, I think very legitimate interpretation, although I think if the headlines are saying confirmed, I want to push back on that a little bit. I don't think there is one specific way to interpret this, and honestly, the only way I think we can be able to interpret this is just to ask James Mangold himself, and none of us can do that, so for now, we're going to have to take his words. The obvious headlines that are coming out of this: Swamp Thing is not connected to the DCU. It's going to be a standalone Elseworlds movie. Now, I want to pause there and look at this quote again. This is the quote. While I'm sure DC views Swamp Thing as a franchise, I would be viewing it as a very simple, clean, gothic horror movie about this man/monster. Just doing my own thing with this, just a franchise, or just a standalone, rather. Is there anything in this quote that indicates it's Elseworlds? No, not explicitly. Is there anything in this quote to suggest that it's outside of the DCU? Maybe implicitly, but explicitly? No, nothing. I mean, again, I want to be clear that, James Mangold is just talking off the cuff, right? And he says later on, he gives some stuff, he talks some stuff about, superhero films and all these different things, and he talks about his experience with Logan a little bit. And so, yeah, but I mean, in that specific quote, right, is there anything explicit there that he says it's not in the DCU? No. I mean, he talks about the fact that, when you're talking about these kinds of IPs, people view them almost religiously. And I think that, yeah, to be fair to him, it's a scary thing. I don't think he's scared of it necessarily. I just think, it is something to think about, the fact that people take this so incredibly seriously, right? And yeah, I mean, we're making entire YouTube videos about it, but I just want to point out here, the obvious headline: James Mangold says that Swamp Thing is not a DCU film and it's an Elseworlds film. It's a plausible interpretation, and I'm certain that, there is a world in which, I'm not convinced we're living in that world, but there is a world in which that is true. However, I just want to look at this quote here And look at James Mangold as a person. Like, let's pair this with the Star Wars quote that he gave in a, maybe the same interview or whatever, but separately, where he was like, I don't want to be handcuffed by the lore. And what he was really saying there, I believe, is that I just want to, like, I want to make a Star Wars film. There's nothing in there in his quote said, I hate Star Wars, but they're just making me do this, so I'm just going to do whatever I want. I think he really loves Star Wars, but he just doesn't want to make a movie in the continuity of the Skywalker saga. Oh, that's totally fine. I think if we kind of take that same vibe and energy and bring it to this quote here, honestly, what I think he's saying here is that I just want to make my own movie. And so when he says standalone, honestly, I don't think that excludes this from saying, that this film is going to be in the DCU. For all we know, right? This is my interpretation. This is my personal interpretation, but I believe that it's just as likely as the one that people are saying of it's not going to be in the DCU. My personal interpretation of this is that James Mangold, when he says standalone, he means it's going to be, his vision for this film is going to be singular. It's just going to be from minute 0 to minute, 2 hours and 15 minutes or whatever, and then he's done. He's not going to think about Swamp Thing 2. He's not going to think about how it connects to the DCU. He's not going to think about that. That's somebody else's problem if they want it. He's just thinking Swamp Thing, this movie, and that's it. And, in terms of when he says, I'm sure DC views Swamp Thing as a franchise. I mean, you can have, like, Swamp Thing 1, 2, and 3 is a franchise within the DCU. Captain America 1, 2, 3, and now 4, I would say Captain America 1, 2, and 3, and now the new Captain America, it's part of a franchise within the MCU. Like, I don't think when he says, I'm sure DC views Swamp Thing as a franchise, I would be viewing it as a very simple, clean, gothic horror movie. I don't think he's saying, so therefore I'm taking it out of the DCU. I think he means, I'm sure that DC wants to make Swamp Thing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 if it's successful. And he's like, I don't care. I'm just going to make Swamp Thing. Like, when he made Logan, was he like, oh yeah, I have plans for Logan too? Obviously Logan died at the end of that movie. But still, do I have plans for the X-23 spinoff, which I know was considered at one point. I don't know whether he was attached to it or not. But like, that's not what he was signing up for. He was signing up to make Logan, which I love, by the way. And that's it. So, look, I get it. People are saying Swamp Thing is not going to be in the DCU. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Maybe I just missed something. Maybe I'm looking at this article that seems to have the complete quotes here. And maybe that's what he's saying. But I've seen people go like, it's not going to be part of the DCU. I don't think that that's true. I think what he's saying is, I'm going to make this one movie. I'm going to make it as good as I can. It's going to be a simple, clean, gothic horror movie about this man/monster. And that's it. I'm done. But I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, and you'll have to let me know. Guys, let me know in the comments down below. Do you think that Swamp Thing is not in the DCU anymore? Or do you think that he just means he's just going to be making this one movie, and then he's not going to think about it anymore? Let me know in the comments down below.